Hello everyone. In the first part of this lecture, we discussed mixed method research. We talked also about the advantages and weaknesses of mixed method research. In the second part of this lecture, we will talk about qualitative research proposal. So, as we covered the main aspects in qualitative research, starting from research paradigms, then we talked about the data collection methods in qualitative research, such as interviews, focus groups, and observation. We also talked about recording data in qualitative research and data analysis, mainly using thematic analysis in qualitative research. It's important to at this stage to be able or to be familiar with writing a research proposal. Previously, you have taken quantitative research and you have learned how to write a quantitative research proposal. Qualitative research proposal somehow is similar. Let's say it may have different structures, but it's something maybe similar to a quantitative research proposal, let's say with the same sections, but the difference in this time or in writing qualitative research proposal, that you need to apply the theoretical concepts that you have learned in writing your research proposal. So similar to quantitative research proposal, it includes abstract followed by introduction, literature review, research objectives, research aim objectives, and methods. Methods which include sample and population, where you need to report what's the type of sampling that you used in your qualitative research. You need to describe data collection procedures and data analysis and ethical considerations that you need to address in your qualitative research. You need also to include timeline for your research, budget of your research, dissemination plan, and finally, in your research proposal, you can also include appendices, which may include, let's say, for example, the interview guide that you have developed and or that you need to use in performing your interviews, and which we already discussed throughout this course. Interview guide or interview schedule you may include, as for example in a quantitative research, you may use your tool or your survey or questionnaire in your appendices. In qualitative research proposal, you can include, for example, the interview guide or interview schedule. So as we mentioned in this lecture, we will discuss the process of writing qualitative research proposal. So we'll start with a background and introduction regarding qualitative research in general and qualitative research proposal. So Morse in 2003 indicates that qualitative methodology is used when little is known about a topic. The research context is poorly understood, the boundaries of a domain are ill-defined, the phenomenon under investigation is not quantifiable, the nature of the problem is not clear, or the researcher suspects that the phenomenon need to be re-examined. So in this in this part, we are talking about the uses of qualitative research that we have already covered throughout this course. So when there's a little is known about a topic that we sometimes or we generally call qualitative research as exploratory research, and the research context is poorly understood. In the literature, you can see that qualitative research is mainly called as a contextual research, and you need to know that all the qualitative research that is performed in one context, or the findings of qualitative research that is performed in a particular context is different from different from the findings that of qualitative research that is performed in a other context or in a different context. So it's mainly a contextual research. Also, whereby the phenomenon under investigation you cannot quantify it, or you cannot do a quantitative research to measure some variables in this phenomenon. So you can use also qualitative research. So researchers need a clear picture of the issues and the questions that they want to investigate, as well as ideas of how they are going to go about investigating them, but always with an openness of mind to improvise, revise, and adjust. So when the researchers need to write the research proposal, there's a pressing need to know and identify the issues and the questions, or let's say research problem or research questions that they need to investigate in their research. Ideas of how they are going to go about investigating them. This is mainly the methods that are that the researcher is thinking of to perform in order to achieve those research objectives. So research proposal gives the reader an idea about the topic or problem or research questions that the researcher wants to address, the methods or procedures that will be followed by the researcher to achieve those objectives or to answer those research questions. And you keep in mind, especially in qualitative research, where we discussed that it's an emergent design. We mentioned in the introduction lecture in this course that qualitative research is an emergent design, in contrast with quantitative research design, which is a fixed design. So always you are writing your proposal, but you want to go to the field to start collect your data, so you need always to have an open mind to change, to make adjustment. Let's say they call it in research amendment to your research proposal, and sometimes these amendments are required from the institutional review part, where you present your qualitative research proposal to get the ethical approval for. So you can expect that there are some modifications or some adjustments or some amendments that needed to be addressed in your research proposal. So you need to anticipate those types of adjustment. So writing a proposal for a qualitative study is therefore a challenge, as the qualitative researcher designs studies by conducting them, as opposed to conducting studies by design. So in quantitative researchers. So quantitative researchers generally believe they know what they do not know. So they are knowing the type of knowledge they expect to obtain by doing a study and then striving to obtain it. However, a qualitative researcher enters the study not knowing what's known, so not knowing the phenomenon that drive the inquiry forward. So this is the main difference between, let's say, between a quantitative research proposal. So quantitative research proposal is somehow something more fixed and less emergent than a qualitative research proposal. So the design of a study in qualitative research is better refined or better adjusted by conducting them. So you're conducting your study, so you do some modification, let's say, for your interview schedule or interview guide and so on. So this is going to be happening while you are doing your research in the field, in qualitative research. So the qualitative proposal writer can therefore only anticipate how the study will proceed. So this is anticipation. Qualitative research proposal, as due to the nature of its design, as its emergent design, maybe some changes that will happen, maybe some updates will happen in the field and so on. So the qualitative research proposal can only anticipate how the qualitative study will proceed. So again, qualitative research begins by accepting that there is a range of different ways of making sense of the world. This is what we have already discussed throughout this course, that the truth is only valid in a specific context. That's why we always saying about qualitative research that it's a contextual research, whereby the findings of a qualitative research in one context are different from findings of qualitative research in other contexts, and is concerned with discovering the meanings seen by those who are being researched and with understanding their view of the world rather than that of the researcher, which is different from quantitative research. So now we'll start talking about process of the qualitative proposal. So qualitative researchers often find themselves in a catch-22 situation. So what is the meaning of catch-22 situation? It's a difficult situation in which the solution to a problem is impossible because it's also the cause of the problem. So let's say someone saying he's, for example, applied for a job, and someone asking about if he get an interview for that job, despite maybe, for example, he's having a master's degree, but he cannot be applied to this job. So the situation was that the job needs, or applying for a job needs experience, and in the same time getting an experience need to be involved in a job. So this is an example of catch-22 situation. Similarly, qualitative researchers often find themselves in a catch-22 situation. They have intentionally selected a qualitative research design, as little is known about the phenomenon to be studied, yet it is expected to write how data analysis will be done when the data is not known. However, it's imperative that the researcher must convince the proposal evaluation committee or funding agency reviewers in order to be allowed to proceed with the study. So in response to such situation, Morse and Field in 1996 remarked that clearly developing a rigid plan for a qualitative project, including detailed plans for data collection and analysis, becomes impossible when writing qualitative proposal. Unlike positivist research, which is a quantitative research, there is no single accepted framework for a qualitative research proposal, To present an acceptable proposal means shifting away from one's own concerns and thinking about the questions that the reader or reviewer of the research proposal will be asking. These questions do not necessarily differ from the questions asked in quantitative research, but will alert one to the possible questions that will be asked. The questions a research proposal must answer are: why should anyone be interested in my research? Is the research design credible, achievable, and carefully explained? In other words, is it logical? Is the researcher capable of doing the research? So, Silverman in 2000 suggests that the researcher, whether a qualitative or a quantitative, answers these questions properly. This can be achieved by focusing on the following guidelines that will be discussed in the coming slides. So you need to be practical, be persuasive, make broader links, aim for crystal clarity, and plan before you write your qualitative research proposal. So, firstly, one of the important considerations that a researcher should take into account while writing qualitative research proposal is to be practical. So you need to indicate to the members of the proposal evaluation committee or funding agency reviewers, if you are applying for taking a fund or for obtaining a fund to perform your research, you need to show to them how your research will address the identified research problem or solve a particular issue, for example, staff morale or patients' perception of quality of care. So you need to show to them what are the implications, what are the applications of your research, why it's important, why it's significant. You need to show to them also what are the stakeholders or who are the stakeholders that may benefit from the findings of this research. You need to show also who are the audience of your research. You need to provide audience, wide audience, not only for a particular person or a particular party, let's say. So you can say that this research will benefit healthcare providers, will benefit patients, will benefit healthcare organizations, healthcare managers, and so on. So as we mentioned, you need to be practical in writing your qualitative research proposal, and even in any type of proposals, even quantitative research proposal, you need to be practical in writing such type of proposals. Secondly, you need to be persuasive in writing your qualitative research proposal. So Morse in 1994 explains that the first principle of grantsmanship, and for that matter approval of your proposal, is to recognize that a good proposal is an argument. The proposal must take case to the proposal evaluation committee or funding agency that the research question is interesting and that the study is important. Thus, the proposal must be written persuasively. So you need to build an argument within your qualitative research proposal that when you apply to get a grant, let's say for example, or fund for your research and get the approval for the research ethics committee, they need to be convinced of your argument and the importance of your research, the significance of your research. So as a researcher, you must be balanced with a realistic understanding of what you can achieve. To be persuasive implies that you must convince other people, like other researchers, research funding agencies, educational institutions, and supervisors, that your research is worth spending scarce resources on. So you need, as we mentioned, to be practical, you need to be persuasive. You convince people of the value of your work by showing them how your research will make a difference to the world, or by identifying a dilemma in existing theory which your research will help resolve. So this is an important issue. Your research will add something to the literature. So you need to show how your research is unique. What are the aspects in your research that will add to the existing literature in the particular area of concern or of interest in the literature. So in this way you can convince those agencies or those educational institutions to approve your research, to maybe to get fund for performing your research as well. Also, the qualitative researcher needs to make broader links. What do we mean by make broader links? So the researcher should demonstrate in the proposal the understanding of the broader implications of the proposed research. So Morse, again in 1994, suggests that one way of achieving this is to place the problem in context, to show, for instance, that when we understand this, we will be able to work on that. So indicate how your research will improve practice or influence policy. So again, all of these points regarding be practical, be persuasive, make broader links, all of them, there's a general or wide overlap between those points. However, you need to apply them in your practice when you are writing your qualitative research proposal. It's an important point or guide to follow, and to use these points as a guideline that will help you in writing your qualitative research proposal. Again, also the qualitative researchers need to, when writing qualitative research proposal, to aim for crystal clarity. So the aim of the researcher should be for clearly stated in simple language that describes the research in a way that non-specialists can comprehend. So you need to write your qualitative research proposal in a way that any other person or any other individual other than who are interested in this field can understand, can comprehend. So this is an important point, to use a concise and simple language. So Morse in 1994 again argues that the researcher should resist the temptation to lapse into pure jargon, as some of the reviewers will be from other disciplines, and the proposal writer should assume nothing and explain everything. So Silverman gives advice to the researcher and states that the proposal should be concise, using short, simple sentences. So it should be comprehensible by those who are outside the area of interest. You should use short, simple sentences. You should be concise, and maybe some points, some definitions that when someone who are outside this area can read in your proposal, and maybe he or she cannot understand this definition, you need to provide definitions for terms that are used in your proposal, so that it will be comprehensible by others. So finally, the final consideration that a qualitative researcher needs to take into account is to plan before you write. Remember the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So it's important that the writer plans the process, as the proposal should not only demonstrate that it's based on an intelligent understanding of the existing literature, but it must also show that the writer has thought about the time needed to conduct each stage of the research. You need to provide a timeline for research, to provide time management, should be embedded in the planning process. So the proposal will also be judged on the researcher's account of how time will be used. So Harper in 1993 notes that one needs to adopt a systematic and logical approach to research, the key to which is the planning and management of your time. So time management is an important, and providing a timeline for the execution of your research project is important and need to be taken into account while writing your qualitative research proposal. So what is the structure of the qualitative proposal? So it's similar to any type of proposal. For example, a quantitative or a qualitative research proposal may have the same structures, and even you may have different structures other than this that you can see. So this is an only suggestion. For a structure of qualitative proposal, you start with a cover page, then you need to write an abstract, introduction, review of the literature. Some of the structures regarding qualitative research proposal, they combine introduction with a review of the literature, and you don't need to integrate a review of the literature section in your qualitative research proposal. Some others you need to integrate them, so both way, you can do both way. Research problem and research questions, research objectives, research design, methods. Sometimes you can see the research methods included research design and so on. So it's different according to the author of so it depends on the guidelines that you may be provided by a particular funding agency or educational institution. So you may have different structure other than what you can see here in this slide. Research methods including ethical considerations. You need also to write the dissemination plan, timeline, and we also talked about the importance of time management and budget, and finally appendices where you can include, for example, let's say the tool that you want to use on your research, or the interview guide, let's say in the case of qualitative research, and sometimes the consent forms and participant information sheets you can also include if you have if you want to use a tool that's already used in the literature and you want to use it in your research or utilize it in your research. You can get the approval from the author or developer of this tool, and you include it in the appendices of your qualitative research proposal. Firstly, we have the cover page. So usually formal documents have a cover page. The format of the cover page is often provided by the proposal evaluation committee or the funding agency. If no format is provided, create a cover page and include the following: title of the proposal, name and affiliation of the researcher or principal investigator, and add also co-investigators if relevant. The affiliation will include the type of degree, for example, Master in Public Administration, as well as the name of the university where the study will be conducted. Lines for the signatures of the researcher as well as the university authorities. Contact detail information including address, phone and fax numbers, and email address. So all of these can be included in the cover page of your qualitative research proposal. So the first section would be the abstract. The abstract is a synopsis of the proposal. It's important that it's comprehensive enough to inform the evaluators or reviewers and to introduce the project. It should include a short introduction to the research problem, the research question, research purpose and objectives, followed by the research design and research method that will be adopted in your research. The abstract is usually 250 to 300 words long, but this is often directed by the committee guidelines or the funding agency, so it's maybe different. So first impressions count. So from the abstract you can get the first impressions of the project, and this is also true for the abstract, as this will be the first part that the reviewers read. So it's advisable to leave the writing of the abstract until the end, as it will be easier to write after you have a clarity of the research process. So generally you write the abstract in the end after you agree on your research method, your research design, what are the main details of your research, how you will perform your research. So after that, when you have a clarity about all of those issues, you can write the abstract. The inclusion of no more than 5 keywords is advisable also at the end of the abstract. So you can, at the end of the abstract, provide keywords regarding your research topic. So structure can be given to the abstract by adding headings, for example, background, aim, purpose and specific objectives, data sources, method, results, and conclusion, followed by keywords. So you can structured abstract and also unstructured abstract. So again, it may be related to the guidelines that are provided by the evaluators or reviewers. Abstract, you can start with the introduction. So you begin with something interesting that immediately catches attention. You need to introduce the question and what it's that you want to know or understand, and explain the interest in the topic. The introduction must get the attention of the reader and convince him or her of the value of your study. So it must set the stage. So at the beginning of the proposal, the significance of the study should be stated, and it must be made clear why there is need for the study. What is the significance of your study? So you need to introduce that and to catch the attention of the readers while you are writing your introduction. So Burns and Grove in 2005 provides questions that can be used to assess the significance of the study. Who has an interest in the domain of inquiry? What do we already know about the topic? what has not been answered adequately in previous research and practice, and how will this research add to knowledge, practice, and policy in this area. Furthermore, the introduction sets the scene and puts the research in context. So you need to catch the attention of the readers. You need to introduce the topic. You need to give a background about this topic. You need to mention or to make explicit what is the importance, what is the significance of your research, and how your research will add to the existing literature in this area. The second section, we start with abstract, introduction, review of the literature. So relevant literature should be cited that demonstrate the need for the research study in such a manner that it convinces the evaluators or reviewers that the study is worthwhile. So literature consists of all written sources relevant to the topic you have selected or the phenomenon under investigation. It's often a challenge to include all relevant or most supportive literature as data, knowledge, and information availability expand daily in the digitally enhanced knowledge environment, doubling every 18 months in 2008. So it's therefore suggested that the researcher critique previous research and demonstrate how the present study will clarify or compensate for shortcomings in previous research, and how the study will add to the existing body of knowledge. The literature review provides a theoretical context for the study, but it's not a conceptual framework, as it does not drive the study or provide an outline for the analysis. So it's just providing the previous work in this area. What are the shortcomings or what are the limitations in previous work that force the researcher to step into this new research. And it's not conceptual framework. As we mentioned, conceptual framework is something different. Sometimes you can see some researchers include conceptual framework, others are not including conceptual framework. So apart from simply offering an account of the research that has been carried out previously, the author should describe how he or she searched the literature. So again, in the literature review, you can see some researchers including the search engines that have been used in reviewing of the literature. What are the keywords that are used in entering and used and entered in those engines, and to get the literature regarding or relevant to this area. So this involves describing the computer search engines used and the keywords entered into those engines. For example, you can say that like searches were performed using the following resources: Nexus database, South African Journal database, or whatever. You can say PubMed, for example, Medline, CNAL database, Google Scholar, and so on. The literature review is not necessarily a separate heading, as we mentioned, as it could be integrated in the introduction, providing a rationale for the planned study. So it depends on the guidelines that are provided. So the following section is the research problem, whereby you need to indicate what is your research problem, why you are focusing on it. You need to indicate, in this case, some numbers to indicate to the nature or the extent of the problem, the burden of the problem, let's say. Why it's important why it's considered as a problem, and you need to be as specific as you can to convince the readers why it's important to focus on this problem. So then you conclude this section with research questions. For example, in the case of qualitative research, you need to include how questions or why questions. For example, as you can see, how is the primary healthcare policy implemented by different health professions? What happens to the system of relations when the activities take place? What happens to the quality of care of patients from a low income status if they cannot access healthcare? So those are some kind of questions for qualitative research questions. So in summary, the research questions clearly delineate the research, sometimes with sub-questions, and the scope of research questions needs to be manageable within the time frame and context of the study. So you need to be aware, again, about the feasibility of your research, the ability to achieve those research questions within the given timeline, and the context of your study. So it's important to, when you write your research questions, to know that am I able to achieve those research questions by using the methods that I will specify in the next sections within the given time frame. So this is an important consideration that you need to be aware of. So the research purpose and objectives. You can see some types of proposals or some proposal that you can see research aim, objectives, and methods. So what is the importance? What is the difference between aim and objectives? Aim, it's the general indication or a broad indication of what you are going to achieve in your research. However, the objectives are more specific, and you can get like numbering or use a bullet point, right? Your objectives could be 2, 3, or 4 objectives that you need to achieve in your research. So as we mentioned, the research purpose, or sometimes it's called as aim, is a broad indication of what the researcher wishes to achieve in the research, and the research purpose should be like a concise, clear statement of the specific goal of the study, while the objectives, as you have one aim and many objectives. You can write them below the aim of your research as a bullet point, or use numbering by, for example, to identify, to explore, to describe, and so on. So here you can see an example of research purpose and objectives, or let's say research aim. As we mentioned, the aim of the research is a broad indication of what you are going to achieve or wishing to achieve in your research. So an example here, you can see the aim of this research is to develop best practice guidelines for counseling for HIV testing during pregnancy, and you can write below this. This aim is achieved by means of the following objectives, and you can write, as we mentioned, 3 or 4 objectives that you are going to achieve this aim by those objectives. So as you can see, the aim is a general guideline, general indication, or general broad indication for what you are going to achieve, and you are going to achieve this aim by those following objectives, as you can see in this slide. So this is the main idea of research aim and objectives. The research aim is a clear statement, concise statement regarding the broad problem, and you are going to achieve those aims by writing 3 or 4 objectives. The following section in qualitative research proposal is the research design. So as we mentioned, research starts with a problem and is a precondition for any study. The development of a research design follows logically from the research problem. This implies that the research problem directs the choice of the design. What is the meaning of research design? Research design is a set of guidelines and instructions to be followed in addressing the research problem. It has been suggested that the main function of a research design is to enable the researcher to anticipate what the appropriate research decisions should be in such a manner that the eventual validity of the research findings are maximized. The research design is the plan or blueprint that the researcher will use in conducting the research. The aim of the research design is to align the pursuit of a research goal with the practical considerations and limitations of the project. The components that need to be included in the research design are its qualitative or quantitative or mixed nature, whether the study is explorative, descriptive, comparative, or explanatory, and whether the study is contextual or universal. And as we all know, always qualitative research, as we mentioned, it's a contextual research. So qualitative studies are always contextual, as the data is only valid in a specific context. The researcher can then follow with a short description of each component, as we mentioned. So in the description of a contextual study, I mean qualitative study in this regard or in this context, it's important to include a description of the context or setting in which the research will be conducted. For example, this research will be conducted in this particular hospital. To describe this hospital, what are the number of beds in this hospital, what is the number of the healthcare professionals, is the number of wards, what are those wards in this hospital. So you need to provide a clear description of this particular setting, explain why this setting was chosen. on what are the pages that the researcher use to select this particular context to conduct the study in. So following, you need to write research method. The research design will influence your decisions about your research methods. Research methods includes the steps of population and sample, data collection procedures, let's say, ensuring rigor and data analysis. And sometimes in some types of proposals, you need to write the ethical considerations within the research method section. So firstly, in the method section, you need to write about your population and sample. Population refers to all the elements, individuals, objects, or substances that meet certain criteria for inclusion in a given universe. So you predetermined your inclusion criteria, let's say for your participants or your population, and you select those population from. So they further also indicate that the definition of the population depends on the sample criteria and the similarity of participants in the various settings. You need to describe the composition of the population in your study. Explain how you will select participants and gain entry into the research context if relevant. Continue with the description of the sample, sampling techniques. A sample is a subset of the population that's selected for a particular study. You need to name the sampling technique you will use and defend its use. So, for example, motivate why you would use purposive sampling. State the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and lastly, project the size of the sample. Okay. The population and sample in your study. You need to describe the data collection procedures. So the researcher describes what he or she is aiming to find out and how the data will be collected. So the process of description will depend on the researcher use an inductive or deductive strategy, as this will influence the decision of whether the qualitative research will be carried out departing from a theoretical framework or not. With an inductive strategy, the researcher would embark upon the project without working from an explicit conceptual frameworks and merely use a central theoretical statement to guide the research. In the deductive strategy, the researcher embarks upon a research project with a clear conceptual framework. So this is the main difference between inductive strategy and deductive strategy. And as we mentioned, as a qualitative research is a mainly inductive strategy, we don't need to understand to get into a conceptual framework prior to performing your study, as you need to generate this theory in the end. However, let's say in quantitative research, or sometimes there are some particular forms of qualitative research that follows a deductive strategy, and you in this case you need to use a clear conceptual framework in mind. This may be a model theory or typology. So the use of a deductive strategy leads to a relatively rigid manner of conceptualization, operationalization, and data collection, and will ultimately constitute the frame of reference for analysis and interpretation. So as we mentioned, in the quantitative research, generally we use a conceptual framework, and in qualitative research we don't use this conceptual framework in mind prior to performing the study. If you are following the inductive strategy in qualitative research. However, you can find in the literature that there are some forms of qualitative research that follows the deductive strategy, whereby the researcher needs to have a conceptual framework, or let's say theoretical framework, that will guide the analysis and interpretation later on in mind. And you collect qualitative data, let's mean textual data, and you use this textual data to validate this conceptual framework or this theoretical framework, and use it to interpret the findings from this textual data. So continuing talking about the data collection, it's important that the researcher describes the kind of data that will be collected, how you will collect your data. You need to describe your data collection procedures in detail. So as we mentioned, It's important that the researcher describes the kind of the data that will be collected, for example, examination of existing documents, field notes, audio tapes, focus groups, and so on, and how the data will be collected, for example, through interviews, focus groups, and so on. And the method, as we mentioned, should be described in detail, as it's inadequate to simply refer to data that will be collected using participant observation, field notes, or diaries. So you need to provide justification, you need to provide description, detailed description of your data collection procedures. So a description with the justification of each method and how the method contribute to the understanding of the phenomenon under study must be presented. If an interview guide will be used, include the question in the proposal or attach as an appendix. It's important to do that. So you can put your interview guide either in the appendices, or you include it within your body text, but it's according to the guidelines that are required. Explain in detail how interviews will be conducted, how focus groups will be conducted, inclusive of the role of the facilitator and moderator, how responses to questions will be elicited, and so on. So here you can see an example from a particular study. So observation and questioning were preferable data collection methods for the main study. The researcher was assisted by an experienced expert clinician accompanist who was purposefully selected for data collection. The researcher and the assistant used the developed instrument and its related manual to evaluate the competence of newly qualified registered nurses. So, as we mentioned, you need to provide details in your methods and your data collection procedures. What are the data collection methods? How you will use those data collection methods? How you you will interview those participants? What is the interview guide? What is the interview questions, and so on. So you need to provide as much details as you can in your data collection procedures section. Also, you need to reflect the rigor or soundness of your research throughout your proposal. So, as we discussed previously throughout this course, when we talked about the quality or rigor of qualitative research, we mentioned 4 main criteria, and we mentioned some strategies or some techniques or methods that can be used to achieve those points, such as, for example, dependability, transferability, confirmability, and credibility. So we mentioned some techniques or methods that can be used to achieve those points or those aspects. So you need to address these points, you need to reflect those points. What are the techniques that you will use to, for example, to assure the credibility of your research? What are the techniques that you will use to assure the confirmability of your research? So you mentioned the techniques that you will use. For example, you will use triangulation, you will use member checking, or what we call as a participant validation or respondent validation, and so on. So you pick the technique that you want to use, and you need to reflect that in your proposal to assure the rigor of your qualitative research. So in the data analysis section and under the method section, you can describe the intended data analysis procedure. And for the description of data analysis, relevant methods with citations from the literature must be included. In explaining data reduction of the researcher, provides details of write-ups of field notes, transcription procedures, the use of computer programs if planned. So you need to, as similar to data collection procedures, you need to describe your data analysis procedures in details as well. So an important section that needs also to be included in qualitative research proposal is the ethical considerations. Qualitative research introduces a special moral and ethical problems that are not usually encountered by other researchers during data collection, perhaps due to the unstructured conversational tone of interviews and the intimate nature of interaction between the researcher and participants, as we are already mentioned throughout this course. So it's therefore very important that the researcher takes special care in ensuring the ethical standards are met. Ethical considerations refer to the protection of the participants' rights, obtaining informed consent, and the institutional review process, and which means gaining or obtaining the ethical approval. The researcher needs to provide adequate information on each of these aspects. Protection of the participants' rights include the right to self-determination, right to privacy, right to autonomy and confidentiality, right to fair treatment, and the right to protection from discomfort and harm. Informed consent needs to be obtained from the participants as well as the research site and the relevant authorities. Important point or aspect that need to be considered in qualitative proposal is to describe your dissemination plan. So the researcher should provide a condensed description of the plan that will be utilized to disseminate results. For example, you will, for example, present your results in a conference. So you want to make a publication to disseminate the findings of your research. So this should be made clear. So publication, for example, for dissemination plan, you can write that the findings of this research will be published in a peer-reviewed journals, paper or poster presentations at conferences. Timeline also is an important aspect or important section in your research proposal. The timeline is a schedule or work plan for the completion of the research project. The plan includes all the research activities to be completed, the predicted length of time that each activity will take to complete, and when it will be performed. The plan can be described as text, but as several tasks may be conducted concurrently, it's often presented as a table or a graph. A possibility is the use also of the Gantt chart. Gantt chart is a standard tool that can be used by the researcher to structure the timeline of the project. For example, to perform or to show or indicate specific activities with target dates. Qualitative researchers are often very optimistic about the time to be allowed for the research activities, but the qualitative researcher can experience numerous delays. For instance, delays with interviews and the time-consuming process of a qualitative data analysis. So it has been suggested that researchers should estimate how long each activity will take and then triple that time to anticipate those delays in your timeline. This time or this leeway is important when funds are requested to ensure that there is adequate funding for staff and for the completion of the project. So also budget is an important aspect in a qualitative research proposal, although there is a notion which interferes with the positive perception of a qualitative inquiry is the idea that qualitative research is inexpensive to conduct. However, it's important to understand that qualitative research is not predictable. Hence, when the researcher prepares a research budget, he or should predict all costs, all aspects all prices in all aspects of the research, and then add an additional allowance for unpredictable disasters, delays, and rising costs. For example, some of the aspects that need to be included in the budget of your qualitative research is the number of participants, for example, that cannot be predicted because data will be collected until saturation. You need to provide an estimation of the number of participants, recording of data, transcripts for interviews, equipment, personnel, budget, supplies, travel, cost of attending a conference for dissemination. So those aspects need to be included in your budget and your qualitative research proposal, and those items need to be justified. So the final section in your research proposal. So after just you finish your previous sections, then you have list of references. Then after that you will need to include the appendices in your research proposal. Those are documents that support the proposal and the application, and those appendices will be specific for each proposal, but documents that are usually required include informed consent form, telephone consent, verification of ethical approval, letters of approval from research sites, letters of support in case of funding application, curriculum vitae of researcher, principal investigator, and maybe the co-investigators as well. So in this lecture, we covered the main aspects in qualitative research proposal. What are the principles that the researcher the researchers needs to adopt in writing qualitative research proposal? What are the main headings or main aspects that need to be discussed in a qualitative research proposal? Thank you.